A lonely farmer helps a stranded bride on her wedding day, but the next day, her billionaire father changes his life forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning frost crunched beneath Jack Miller's worn boots as he crossed the weathered porch of his farmhouse. A thin mist hung over the fields, painting the Iowa countryside in ethereal shades of silver and gold. At 45, Jack had grown accustomed to the silence that enveloped his 80 acres, a silence broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle or the distant rumble of his ancient tractor. 18 years of solitude had carved lines into his face that no amount of summer sun could soften. 18 years since Sarah's passing had left him alone with a 10-year-old daughter to raise and a farm that demanded everything he had. And now, with Emily off at college in California, pursuing dreams bigger than this small town could contain, the silence had become his only faithful companion. Jack poured coffee into his chipped mug, the same one he'd used every morning for the past decade. The local news station droned in the background, the weatherman promising clear skies, perfect for the Taylor Prescott wedding happening at the old Willow Creek Church. Jack scoffed. The Prescotts were Chicago money, buying up half the county for their summer homes and pushing out families who'd farmed the land for generations. He switched off the television, unwilling to hear more about how the billionaire CEO Richard Prescott was throwing the wedding of the century for his daughter in their quaint rural community, a community they visited maybe 3 weeks a year. The day stretched before him like all the others: fence repairs on the north pasture, checking the irrigation system, and maybe, if time permitted, fixing that persistent leak in the barn roof. Routine was safe. Routine kept the loneliness at bay. Jack had just loaded his truck with tools when the skies betrayed the weatherman's promise. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, and within minutes, a summer storm unleashed its fury. Rain pounded against the windshield as he drove slowly down the narrow country road that connected his property to the main highway. That's when he saw it. A flash of white through the curtain of rain, just off the shoulder of the road. Jack slowed, squinting through the downpour. A car, a sleek white Mercedes, had slid off into the shallow ditch, its rear wheels spinning helplessly in the mud, and standing beside it, drenched and distraught, was a young woman in a wedding dress. Jack pulled over, grabbing his rain jacket from behind the seat. He approached cautiously, not wanting to frighten her. "Need some help, miss?" he called over the rain. The woman turned, and Jack felt his breath catch. Even with mascara streaming down her cheeks and her elaborate updo collapsing in the downpour, she was striking. All delicate features and wide, panicked eyes. "Oh, thank God," she gasped, her voice trembling. "My phone's dead, and I've been standing here for 20 minutes. No one's come by." "Not many folks use this back road," Jack explained, already assessing the situation. The Mercedes was hopelessly mired in mud. "I'm Jack Miller. My farm's just up the way." "Eliza Prescott," she replied, attempting to push soaked strands of hair from her face with shaking hands. I'm supposed to be getting married in 45 minutes. Jack recognized the name immediately. Prescott, the billionaire's daughter, the bride from the wedding he'd just been scoffing at in his kitchen. "Let me see if I can get you out of this ditch," he said, pushing aside his thoughts about rich summer people. Whatever his feelings about the Prescotts, he couldn't leave anyone stranded in this storm, especially not a bride on her wedding day. After 15 minutes of trying, it became clear the Mercedes wasn't going anywhere without a tow truck. The rain had turned the ditch into a muddy trap that only swallowed the tires deeper with each attempt to reverse. "Listen," Jack said finally, returning to where Eliza stood huddled beneath a large oak that provided little shelter from the driving rain. "We need to call for a tow, but my cell reception out here is spotty at best. My house is just 3 minutes up the road. You can dry off, use my landline, and I'll drive you to the church afterward." Eliza looked at her ruined dress, then at her stranded car, and nodded, defeat written across her face. The drive to Jack's farmhouse was silent save for the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers battling the relentless downpour. Jack stole occasional glances at his passenger, this woman from another world who'd somehow washed up on the shores of his ordinary life. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white with tension, a massive diamond engagement ring catching what little light filtered through the storm clouds. As they pulled up to his house, Jack felt a sudden self-consciousness about the peeling paint and sagging porch steps. His home was clean, but worn, bearing the marks of a man who prioritized function over appearance, who had no one to impress but himself. "It's not much," he said as he helped her from the truck, "but it's dry." Inside, Jack quickly cleared yesterday's newspaper from the kitchen table and put on a fresh pot of coffee, while Eliza stood dripping on the faded linoleum, looking utterly lost, a vision in white against his world of weathered browns and grays. "Bathroom's down the hall if you want to try and dry off," he offered, handing her a clean towel. "There's a hairdryer under the sink. I can lend you some clothes, but I doubt anything I have would fit." "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the towel with a grateful nod. While she was gone, Jack called the local towing company. 2-hour wait at minimum, Bill Henderson told him. "Storms caused accidents all over the county." Jack hung up and stared out the window at the unrelenting rain. He'd have to be the bearer of bad news. The bride wasn't going to make it to the church on time. When Eliza emerged from the bathroom, she'd done what she could with her appearance. Her makeup was fixed, her hair somewhat tamed, but her dress remained a sodden mess, the delicate fabric ruined by mud and rainwater. "I called for a tow," Jack said gently. "It's going to be a couple of hours. I'm sorry." Eliza's composure cracked. She sank into a kitchen chair, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "My father will be furious," she whispered. 300 guests, half of Chicago's business elite. The governor is there." Jack poured her a cup of coffee, adding cream and sugar when she nodded. "Can you call the church? Let them know what happened?" Eliza looked up, her eyes suddenly dry and clear. "Would you mind if I used your phone in private?" Jack nodded, showing her to the old rotary phone in the living room before stepping outside onto the covered porch. The rain continued to fall, transforming his neatly tended garden into a miniature swamp. Through the window, he could see Eliza pacing, gesturing emphatically as she spoke. Whatever conversation she was having, it didn't appear to be going well. 20 minutes later, the living room door opened. Eliza stood there, her expression unreadable. "Everything okay?" Jack asked, stepping back inside. "The wedding's been postponed," she said, her voice oddly flat. "They're sending the guests home." Jack wasn't sure what to say. "I'm sorry," seemed inadequate for ruining what should have been the happiest day of her life. "Don't be," Eliza said, a strange smile playing at her lips. "I should be thanking you." "Thanking me? For what?" "For the convenient excuse." She twisted the massive engagement ring off her finger and stared at it. "I didn't want to marry Robert. I never did." Jack blinked, taken aback by the confession. "Then why was I driving to the church? Why was I about to go through with it?" Eliza's laugh was hollow. "Because that's what Prescott women do. We marry the right men from the right families with the right connections. We don't embarrass our fathers by calling off weddings to men they've handpicked for us." She placed the ring carefully on the coffee table. "Until today. Until a storm and a ditch and a kind farmer gave me the perfect out." Jack watched her, this woman who'd just made a life-altering decision in his living room, and felt something shift in the air between them. A recognition, perhaps, of courage he'd long forgotten existed. "Your father won't see it that way," he said quietly. "No," Eliza agreed, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. "He won't." As if summoned by their conversation, headlights cut through the gloom outside, followed by the rumble of a powerful engine. A black SUV pulled up Jack's long driveway, stopping beside his weather-beaten truck. Eliza tensed. That'll be him. Richard Prescott doesn't wait for situations to resolve themselves. He takes control. Jack moved to the window. A tall man in an impeccable suit emerged from the vehicle, seemingly impervious to the rain as he strode toward the house. His silver hair and commanding presence marked him clearly as someone accustomed to authority. Behind him, a younger man in a similar suit exited the passenger side, holding an umbrella. "Eliza!" The deep voice boomed even before knuckles rapped against the door. "Eliza, I know you're in there." Jack looked to Eliza, whose face had gone pale. "Would you like me to ask him to leave?" he offered. She shook her head, straightening her shoulders. "No, I have to face him sometime. Might as well be now." Jack opened the door to find himself face to face with one of the most powerful men in the Midwest. Richard Prescott's cold blue eyes, so similar to his daughter's yet utterly different in their hardness, assessed Jack in an instant and found him wanting. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded, pushing past Jack without waiting for an invitation. And as the billionaire stepped into his humble farmhouse, Jack Miller had no way of knowing that this moment, this collision of worlds, would change the course of his life forever. Richard Prescott stood in Jack's living room like a storm cloud, his presence seeming to shrink the already modest space. His gaze swept across the worn furniture, the faded photographs, the shelves lined with paperback westerns, his expression one of barely concealed disdain. "Eliza," he said, turning to his daughter, "what is the meaning of this? 300 guests waiting. The Sinclairs are humiliated. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Eliza clutched the towel around her shoulders, but her voice remained steady. "My car slid off the road, Father. Mr. Miller was kind enough to help me." "And your phone? The wedding planner has been calling you for hours." "It died in the rain." Richard's jaw tightened. A convenient series of events, I must say. His eyes narrowed as they fell on the diamond ring sitting on the coffee table. Particularly considering that. The younger man who had accompanied Richard shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private, sir," he suggested, his tone deferential. Jack cleared his throat. "I was just about to head out to check on my cattle. Storm makes them nervous. You're welcome to use the house." "That won't be necessary," Richard cut him off. "Harrison, wait in the car." The assistant nodded and retreated, closing the door behind him. Richard turned his attention to Jack. "Mr. Miller, is it? I suppose I should thank you for assisting my daughter." There was no gratitude in his voice, only calculation. Jack had seen that look before, in the eyes of developers who'd tried to buy out his neighbors, assessing the land's value while ignoring the lives built upon it. "Anyone would have done the same," Jack replied, his tone deliberately neutral. Richard smiled thinly. "Perhaps. But not everyone would have allowed her to make a phone call that cost my family considerable embarrassment and the Sinclairs a nearly 7-figure deposit on tonight's festivities." He turned back to Eliza. "Your mother is beside herself." "Mother is always beside herself," Eliza murmured. "It's her natural state." "This isn't a joke, Eliza." Richard's composure finally cracked. "Do you have any idea what you've thrown away? Robert Sinclair will be running his father's hedge fund in 5 years. The merger possibilities alone." "Merger possibilities?" Eliza's laugh was bitter. "Is that what my marriage was to you? A corporate acquisition?" Jack shifted uncomfortably, feeling like an intruder in his own home. "Maybe I should step outside." "No," Eliza said firmly. "Please stay, Mr. Miller. After all, my father should thank the man who saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Richard's face flushed dark red. "You ungrateful child. Everything we've given you." "Everything you've chosen for me," Eliza corrected. "My schools, my friends, my husband." She gestured to her ruined wedding dress. "Even this monstrosity that I hate. $12,000 of silk and lace that makes me look like a pastry. Jack suppressed a smile at her description. He'd thought the same thing when he'd first seen her by the roadside, like an elaborate wedding cake left out in the rain. Richard's eyes narrowed. "We'll discuss this at home. Get your things. I'm not going with you." The words hung in the air, simple but seismic. "Don't be ridiculous," Richard scoffed. "Where exactly do you plan to go? To your apartment that I pay for? To use the credit cards that I provide? To drive the car that I purchased, which, I should add, is currently stuck in a ditch?" Eliza's shoulders slumped slightly, and Jack felt a surge of sympathy. For all her apparent privilege, she was trapped in a cage built of wealth and expectations. "Mr. Prescott," Jack said, surprising himself by speaking up, "it's still pouring out there, and the tow truck won't be here for at least another hour. Why don't you let your daughter collect herself? You can both dry off, have some coffee." "I don't recall asking for your hospitality or your advice," Richard snapped. His gaze returned to Eliza. 5 minutes, then we're leaving." As Richard stepped outside to make a phone call, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Jack busied himself in the kitchen, giving Eliza a moment of privacy. Through the window, he could see Richard pacing on the porch, gesturing angrily as he spoke into his phone. "I'm sorry about all this," Eliza said softly, appearing in the kitchen doorway. "About bringing my family drama into your home." Jack shrugged. "Farms see all kinds of storms. This one's just wearing better shoes than most." That drew a genuine laugh from Eliza, transforming her face. Jack found himself noticing details he'd missed before. A small dimple in her right cheek, the flecks of gold in her blue eyes. "I mean it, though," she continued. "Thank you. Not just for helping me with the car, but for being here. For being kind when my whole world is falling apart." "Is it?" Jack asked. "Falling apart? Or just changing?" Eliza considered this, absently twisting a strand of damp hair around her finger. "I don't know. I've never really defied him before. Not like this." "What will you do now?" "I have some money of my own. Not much, but enough to start somewhere new. Maybe finish the PhD. I abandoned when Father insisted I focus on suitable social connections instead." She smiled ruefully. "Environmental science? Ironic for an oil tycoon's daughter, isn't it?" Before Jack could respond, the door swung open and Richard reappeared. "The car service will be here in 20 minutes, he announced. "Eliza, we're expected at the Drake Hotel by 7. I've arranged a family dinner to discuss damage control." "I'm not going, Father, I told you." Richard's expression hardened. "This rebellious phase ends now. You've had your dramatic moment. You've embarrassed the family sufficiently. It's time to behave like a Prescott." "And if I don't?" Eliza challenged, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then you do so without the Prescott name or the Prescott resources," Richard replied coldly. "Consider carefully whether your pride is worth the cost." Jack had heard enough. "Mr. Prescott," he said, stepping forward, "I don't mean to interfere in family matters, but threatening your daughter on her wedding day, even a canceled one, seems a bit harsh." Richard turned to Jack, his expression one of practiced condescension. "Mr. Miller, isn't it? Tell me, do you have children?" "A daughter. She's in college in California." "And would you allow her to throw away every advantage, every opportunity you'd worked to provide, on a childish whim?" Jack considered the question seriously. "If those opportunities were making her miserable, yes, I believe I would." Richard's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "How convenient to take the moral high ground when you have so little to offer in the first place." The insult landed like a physical blow, but Jack kept his expression neutral. Having little makes it easier to recognize what matters. Richard opened his mouth to retort when his phone rang. He checked the screen and frowned. "I need to take this. Eliza, get ready to leave." He stepped outside again, closing the door with more force than necessary. As soon as he was gone, Eliza let out a long breath. "I'm sorry about that. He's not usually so openly cruel." "Don't apologize for him," Jack said. "You've got enough on your plate." Eliza nodded, then glanced toward the window where her father was visible, gesturing emphatically as he paced. "He wasn't always like this, you know. When I was little, before the company went public, he was different. He used to take me fishing at our lake house, taught me to bait my own hook." There was such wistfulness in her voice that Jack felt compelled to offer some comfort. "People get lost sometimes. Success can be as disorienting as failure." "That's a generous way to look at it." Eliza smiled sadly. "But I think some people just reveal who they truly are when they get what they want." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Jack could see a sleek black town car pulling up beside the SUV. "Your chariot awaits," he said, nodding toward the window. Eliza didn't move. "I meant what I said. I'm not going with him." "Where will you go?" She looked around the kitchen, her expression uncertain. "I don't suppose there's a hotel in town?" Jack shook his head. "Nothing closer than Cedar Rapids, about 40 miles from here. And in this weather." He glanced at the still pouring rain. The front door opened and Richard stepped back inside, shaking water from his coat. "The car is here," he announced. "Eliza, it's time to go." Eliza stood her ground. "I told you, Father, I'm not coming." Richard's expression darkened. This childish defiance has gone on long enough. "It's not defiance. It's a decision. My decision." Father and daughter stared at each other, neither willing to yield. Jack felt the tension building, crackling like the electricity in the storm outside. He was about to excuse himself when Richard abruptly changed tactics. "One night," he said, his voice suddenly reasonable. "Come back to Chicago for one night. Stay in your old room. Talk to your mother. If you still feel the same way tomorrow, I won't stand in your way." Eliza hesitated, clearly tempted by the olive branch, however insincere it might be. "Your word on that?" she asked cautiously. "A Prescott's word is his bond," Richard replied smoothly. Jack didn't miss the calculating gleam in the older man's eye. This wasn't a concession. It was a strategy. Once he had Eliza back in Chicago, surrounded by family pressure and familiar comforts, Richard clearly believed he could bring her back in line. Eliza must have sensed it too. "I appreciate the offer, Father, but no. I need time to think, and I can't do that under your roof." Richard's facade of reasonableness crumbled. "Then you leave me no choice," he said coldly. "Harrison will arrange to have your car towed once the weather clears. I suggest you use the time to reconsider your position." He turned to Jack, his expression glacial. "Mr. Miller, I'll remember this interference." Without another word, Richard Prescott strode out of the farmhouse and into the waiting town car. The vehicles pulled away, leaving swirls of mud in their wake. Silence fell over the farmhouse once more. Jack turned to find Eliza staring out the window, her expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked finally. She turned to him, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "I just burned my entire life to the ground. I have no idea if I'm okay." A small, incredulous laugh escaped her. "But I think I might be free." As the taillights of Richard Prescott's town car disappeared down the long driveway, the full weight of Eliza's decision seemed to settle on her shoulders. She stood in Jack's living room, a runaway bride in a ruined dress without transportation, luggage, or a plan. "I guess I didn't think this through very well," she admitted with a shaky laugh. Jack leaned against the doorframe, studying her with quiet concern. Most important decisions don't come with an instruction manual. Or a change of clothes, apparently. Eliza gestured ruefully at her bedraggled wedding gown. The once pristine silk was streaked with mud, the delicate beadwork along the bodice hanging loose in places. I might be able to help with that, Jack said. My daughter left some things behind when she went to college. She's a bit taller than you, but her clothes should fit well enough until we can figure something out. The simple kindness, we, instead of you, brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes. She blinked them back quickly, nodding her thanks. Jack showed her to Emily's room, a space frozen in time like a museum exhibit of late adolescence. Pennants from the local high school adorned one wall, while framed photographs of a smiling young woman with Jack's eyes and a stranger's smile lined the dresser. Bathroom's through there, Jack said, pointing to a connecting door. Take whatever you need from the closet. I'll make us something to eat. Left alone, Eliza peeled off her wedding dress, relief washing over her as the weight of silk and expectations fell away. She showered quickly, washing away the last traces of the day that was supposed to change her life, and had, just not in the way anyone had planned. In Emily's closet, she found a pair of jeans that were indeed too long but workable when rolled at the ankles, and a faded University of Iowa sweatshirt that smelled faintly of lavender fabric softener. The simple clothes felt like a costume, Eliza Prescott playing the role of normal person, but they were the most comfortable things she'd worn in months. When she emerged, the aroma of cooking food led her to the kitchen. Jack stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled deliciously of garlic and herbs. Hope pasta's okay, he said without turning around. It's nothing fancy. It smells amazing. Eliza settled onto a kitchen chair, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. Between pre-wedding jitters and the day's drama, she hadn't eaten since a slice of toast at dawn. Jack set a steaming plate before her, spaghetti with a rich tomato sauce, flecked with herbs and topped with grated cheese. Family recipe? She asked, twirling pasta around her fork. Jack's smile was tinged with sadness. My wife's. Sarah used to say you could solve most of life's problems with a good tomato sauce and enough basil. Eliza took a bite, closing her eyes as flavors exploded across her tongue. She was right. This is incredible. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of forks against plates and the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, the afternoon sky as dark as evening. Your daughter, Eliza said finally, nodding toward a recent photograph on the refrigerator door. What's she studying in California? Marine biology. Pride warmed Jack's voice. She's in her second year at UC San Diego, got a scholarship. That's wonderful, you must miss her. Jack nodded, his expression softening. Every day, but you don't raise kids to keep them. You raise them to let them go. He glanced at her. Something your father seems to have forgotten. Eliza set down her fork, appetite suddenly diminished. He wasn't always like this. The company went public when I was 12, and everything changed. Suddenly we weren't just wealthy, we were important. Or at least, that's how he saw it. Must have been hard growing up in that spotlight. Harder for my mother, I think. She was a small-town girl who married the ambitious young engineer who promised to change the world with his drilling technology innovations. Eliza traced patterns in the condensation on her water glass. By the time I was in high school, she was medicated to the point of vacancy. Perfect corporate wife, perfect smile, perfect emptiness behind her eyes. And you? I was the perfect Prescott daughter. Straight A's at the right boarding school, the right friends, the right extracurriculars. She smiled humorlessly. Did you know I was nationally ranked in dressage? I hated every minute of it, but it was what Prescott women did. What happened? Jack asked, his tone gentle. To make you finally say no? Eliza considered the question, searching for the precise moment when resistance had crystallized into decision. About a month ago, I overheard Robert, my fiancé, on the phone with his father. They were discussing the merger, as they called it, how the Prescott name and connections would benefit their investment firm. How my father was throwing in some exclusive drilling rights in the Arctic as a wedding gift. She swallowed hard. Robert said, "The girl's tolerable enough, and she knows her place. Won't make trouble." Jack winced. That's rough. The worst part was he was right. I'd never made trouble. I'd spent my entire life being what everyone else wanted. Eliza looked up, meeting Jack's gaze directly. Until today. Until I slid into that ditch and the universe gave me a chance to stop the car before I drove it straight into a life I would have hated. Jack raised his water glass in a toast. To making trouble, then. Eliza laughed, the sound lighter and more genuine than before, and clinked her glass against his. To making trouble. After dinner, Jack cleared the plates despite Eliza's protests. Guest privileges, he insisted. House rule. At least let me dry, she countered, grabbing a dish towel. They worked in tandem, Jack washing, Eliza drying and asking where things belonged. There was something soothing about the domesticity of it, the simple rhythm of the task. So what happens now? Jack asked as he handed her the last pot. After the storm, I mean. The question brought Eliza back to the reality of her situation. I don't know, she admitted. I have some savings my father doesn't control. Money from my grandmother. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to get me started somewhere. Any idea where that somewhere might be? Eliza set the pot in the cabinet and turned to face him, leaning against the counter. I always loved Boston. I started my PhD program at MIT before Father pulled me out. Said it was a waste of time when I should be focusing on my social connections. Environmental science, you mentioned? She nodded, surprised he'd remembered. Sustainable agriculture, specifically. I was researching alternative irrigation systems for drought-prone regions. That's... Jack paused, genuinely impressed. That's important work. I thought so. Eliza shrugged. My father thought it was a hobby at best, a phase I'd outgrow once I settled into my real purpose, being the perfect corporate wife and producing the next generation of Prescott heirs. Jack dried his hands, his expression thoughtful. You know, if you're interested in agricultural research, the State University has a pretty renowned program. It's about an hour from here. Are you suggesting I hide out in rural Iowa? Just thinking out loud, Jack said. It would be the last place your father would look. The idea was absurd. Eliza Prescott, Chicago socialite and almost bride, disappearing into the cornfields of Iowa. And yet, there was something appealing about its very unlikeliness. I don't even have a car, she pointed out, or clothes, or... We can figure that out, Jack said simply. One step at a time. The we again. So casually offered, as if helping runaway brides remake their lives was something he did every day. Why are you being so kind to me? Eliza asked abruptly. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. And now my father has all but threatened you. Jack considered the question seriously. Maybe I recognize something in you, he said finally. The look of someone trapped in a life that doesn't fit anymore. I had that same look after Sarah died, when I was trying to raise a teenager and run a farm and figure out who I was supposed to be without my wife. The naked honesty in his voice touched something deep in Eliza. What did you do? Kept breathing. Kept moving. Eventually I found my way back to myself. He smiled slightly. Different self, but still mine. The rain had finally begun to ease, pattering more gently against the windows. In the sudden quiet, the ringing of the landline telephone seemed unnaturally loud. Jack answered it, his expression changing as he listened. I see. Yes, that's fine. Tomorrow morning works. Thanks for letting me know. He hung up and turned to Eliza. That was the tow company. They won't be able to get to your car until tomorrow. Oh. Eliza tried to mask her disappointment. As terrifying as her impromptu rebellion had been, there was part of her that had hoped to resolve her transportation issue quickly, to maintain the momentum of her escape before doubt could creep in. Jack seemed to sense her uncertainty. "You're welcome to stay here tonight," he offered. "Emily's room is made up, and tomorrow we can figure out next steps." "I couldn't impose—" "It's not an imposition," Jack assured her. "Besides, the nearest hotel is 40 miles away, remember? And it's not like you have a lot of options right now." Put that way, the decision was simple. "Thank you," Eliza said. "I accept." As the evening wore on, they settled in the living room. Jack built a fire in the small stone fireplace, its warmth chasing away the damp chill of the storm. Eliza curled into the corner of the worn sofa, watching the flames dance and listening as Jack told stories about the farm, about Emily's childhood adventures, about the community that had supported him after Sarah's death. It was strange, Eliza thought, how comfortable she felt in this place that was nothing like the world she'd known. There was a genuineness to Jack Miller that she found both unfamiliar and deeply appealing. No agenda, no calculation, just straightforward kindness and an unexpected depth. By the time she retired to Emily's room, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world under a canopy of stars. Eliza stood at the window, gazing out at the silhouettes of trees against the night sky, and felt, for the first time in years, the quiet stirring of possibility. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Her father would not give up easily. That much was certain. Richard Prescott was unaccustomed to defeat, especially at the hands of his own daughter. There would be consequences for her rebellion. But for tonight, in this quiet farmhouse with its creaking floors and simple comforts, Eliza allowed herself to believe that she had made the right choice, that the road ahead, however uncertain, was one she could walk with her head held high. Eliza woke to unfamiliar sounds, birdsong instead of Chicago traffic, the distant lowing of cattle rather than the blare of horns, and beneath it all, a profound silence she couldn't remember experiencing before. Sunlight streamed through the simple curtains of Emily's bedroom, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden rays. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Then yesterday's events came rushing back. The wedding that wasn't. The confrontation with her father. The quiet evening in this farmhouse with a stranger who had shown her more genuine kindness than most people she'd known all her life. Eliza slipped from bed, wincing as her feet hit the cold wooden floor. Emily's borrowed pajamas, flannel pants with cartoon cows and a faded University of Iowa t-shirt, were a far cry from the silk nightgowns that filled her closet in Chicago. Yet she couldn't remember the last time she'd slept so soundly. After washing her face and borrowing Emily's hairbrush to tame her tangled hair, Eliza made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but the smell of coffee drew her to the kitchen. A note sat propped against a mug on the counter. "Help yourself to coffee. Out checking fences. Back soon. Jay." Eliza poured herself coffee, adding a splash of milk from the refrigerator, and wandered to the front porch. The storm had cleared overnight, leaving behind a world washed clean. Fields stretched to the horizon, shimmering with dew under the morning sun. In the distance, she could make out Jack's figure moving along a fence line, his faithful border collie trotting at his heels. The scene was like something from another life, so far removed from the high rises and bustle of Chicago that it might as well be another planet. Yet there was something deeply appealing about its simplicity, its rootedness in things that mattered: growing food, tending animals, working with one's hands. Eliza sipped her coffee, wondering if her life might have been different if Richard Prescott had remained the ambitious young engineer who took his small-town bride fishing on Sundays, rather than becoming the ruthless tycoon whose wealth had built a gilded cage for his family. Her phone, which Jack had kindly charged overnight, chimed from her pocket. Eliza tensed as she checked the screen. 17 missed calls, 38 text messages, and 4 voicemails. Most were from her mother, a few from bridesmaids and friends, none, she noted with a mixture of relief and hurt, from Robert. Apparently, her almost husband wasn't particularly troubled by her disappearance. The latest text was from her mother. "Your father is arranging a private jet to return you to Chicago. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. The Sinclairs are willing to reschedule. We can say you had a health emergency." Eliza stared at the message, incredulity giving way to anger. After everything that had happened, her parents still believed they could smooth things over, that she would return to the fold like a wayward child who'd had her tantrum. She typed a quick reply, "I'm not coming back. Not to Chicago, not to the wedding. Please respect my decision." Her finger hovered over the send button for a long moment before pressing it decisively. Almost immediately, her phone rang, her mother's number flashing on the screen. Eliza declined the call, then, after a moment's consideration, turned off the phone entirely. Whatever storm was brewing in Chicago, she wasn't ready to face it yet. The sound of tires on gravel drew her attention to the driveway, where a tow truck was pulling up. The driver, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, waved to her as he climbed down from the cab. "Morning, ma'am. Bill Henderson from Henderson's Towing. I'm here about a white Mercedes in a ditch." Eliza set down her coffee cup. "That's mine. Thank you for coming." Bill glanced at her attire with poorly concealed curiosity, but maintained a professional demeanor. "If you've got the keys, I can have it out and check it over for damage." As they walked toward the road, Jack appeared from the fields, cutting across to meet them. "Morning, Bill," he called. "Thanks for fitting this in." "No problem, Jack. Nice day for it, anyway." Bill tipped his hat to Eliza. "Ma'am?" The three made their way to where the Mercedes sat, still mired in the muddy ditch. In daylight, the scene of her escape looked far less dramatic than it had felt in the moment. Just a luxury car that had slid off a wet country road. Bill made quick work of winching the vehicle back onto solid ground, then performed a thorough inspection. "Looks like you got lucky," he told Eliza. "No serious damage that I can see. Mud clogging things up, but nothing a good wash won't fix." "Is it drivable?" Jack asked. "Should be fine," Bill confirmed, handing Eliza the keys, "though you might want to take it easy on these back roads. These fancy city cars aren't really built for country driving." After Bill departed, Eliza and Jack stood beside the newly rescued Mercedes, an awkward silence settling between them. "Well," Jack said finally, "I guess you're free to go now." Eliza nodded, turning the keys over in her hand. "I guess I am." Another pause, longer this time. "Do you know where you're headed?" Jack asked. Eliza looked up at the big sky, the rolling fields, the distant tree line. "Not really," she admitted. "I just know I can't go back to Chicago. Not yet, anyway." Jack scuffed at the gravel with his boot. "My offer still stands. You're welcome to stay until you figure things out. Farm's got plenty of room." The generosity of this near stranger continued to surprise her. "Why would you do that? Take in someone you barely know, especially when my father has made it clear he's not your biggest fan?" Jack seemed to consider the question carefully. "Maybe I've been alone too long," he said finally. "Or maybe I recognize someone who needs a safe place to land for a while." His smile was self-deprecating. "Besides, Emily would never forgive me if I sent you packing. She's always wanted a sister." The simple kindness of the offer brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes. "I don't know the first thing about farm life." "Most things can be learned," Jack replied with a shrug. "Question is whether you want to." Did she? Eliza looked down at her borrowed clothes, then at the gleaming Mercedes that represented everything she was running from. The path of least resistance would be to drive away, find a hotel, regroup, maybe call one of the few friends she had who weren't firmly in her father's sphere of influence. But something about this place, about Jack Miller with his quiet strength and unassuming kindness, made her want to stay, at least for a little while. "I'd like to learn," she said finally. "If you're sure it's no trouble." "No trouble," Jack assured her. "Though I should warn you, cows don't care if you're having a crisis of identity. They need milking twice a day, crisis or no crisis. Eliza laughed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. I think I can handle that. They walked back to the house side by side. The Mercedes left parked in the driveway like an alien spacecraft that had landed amid the pickup trucks and tractors of rural Iowa. Inside, Jack put on a fresh pot of coffee while Eliza made toast. A simple domestic tableau that felt both foreign and strangely comfortable. I should probably get some of my things from the car, Eliza said between bites of toast. At least I'll have my own clothes, Jack nodded. And I should probably warn you about Martha. Martha? Martha Henshaw runs the general store in town, doubles as the local gossip clearinghouse. News of your car in the ditch has probably already made the rounds, and if you start showing up at the farm, regular-like. He trailed off with a meaningful look. People will talk, Eliza finished for him. Small towns, Jack said with a shrug. No such thing as a secret. Does it bother you what people might say? Jack considered this, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Hasn't been much to say about me in 18 years. Might be nice to give Martha something new to chew on. Eliza smiled, appreciating his attempt to lighten the situation. Well, if it helps, I'm sure the story of the runaway bride hiding out on Jack Miller's farm will keep her occupied for at least a month. Longer, if she finds out who your father is. The mention of Richard Prescott sobered Eliza's mood. He won't give up easily, you know. He's not used to not getting his way. Neither, I suspect, is his daughter, Jack observed with surprising insight. At least not anymore. Eliza considered this, realizing the truth in his words. No, she agreed, not anymore. After breakfast, Jack gave her a proper tour of the farm. 80 acres of mostly corn and soy, with a small dairy operation, and a few acres devoted to vegetables that he sold at the local farmers market. The tour ended at the barn, a sturdy structure that smelled of hay and livestock. It's not much compared to what you're used to, Jack said, watching her take it all in. But it's honest work. It's beautiful, Eliza replied, and meant it. There was something deeply appealing about the tangible reality of the farm, so different from the abstract world of investments and corporate maneuverings that had defined her family's existence. As they walked back toward the house, a plume of dust on the horizon caught Jack's attention. He stopped, shading his eyes against the sun. Expecting someone? Eliza asked, noting his sudden tension. No, Jack replied, his expression growing concerned. And that's not a local vehicle. As the dust cloud drew nearer, a sleek black SUV came into view, identical to the one that had brought Richard Prescott to the farm the previous day. My father, Eliza whispered, her heart sinking. He's found me already. Jack's jaw tightened. Want me to send him packing? Eliza squared her shoulders, drawing strength from Jack's steady presence beside her. No, I need to face him myself. But... She glanced at him uncertainly. Would you mind staying close? Wild horses couldn't drag me away, Jack promised. And in that moment, Eliza believed him completely. As the SUV pulled into the driveway, they stood side by side on the porch steps, the billionaire's daughter and the solitary farmer, an unlikely alliance braced for whatever storm was about to break over them. The black SUV came to a stop in a swirl of dust. Jack and Eliza waited, tension building as the seconds stretched. Finally, the driver's door opened. But it wasn't Richard Prescott who emerged. Instead, a tall woman in her 50s stepped out, her elegant gray suit and perfectly coiffed blonde hair looking utterly out of place against the backdrop of the weathered barn. Mother, Eliza whispered, clearly stunned. Victoria Prescott removed her designer sunglasses, surveying the farm with barely concealed distaste before her gaze settled on her daughter. Eliza, darling, this little adventure has gone on long enough, don't you think? Eliza's spine stiffened as her mother approached. Jack remained at her side, a solid, reassuring presence. It's not an adventure, Mother. It's a decision. Victoria climbed the porch steps, her Louboutin heels navigating the worn wood with practiced precision. Up close, Jack could see the strain beneath her polished exterior, the slight tremor in her hands, the tightness around her eyes. "Mr. Miller," she said, acknowledging him with a brittle smile, "I believe we have you to thank for providing shelter to my daughter during her moment of confusion." "Mrs. Prescott," Jack replied neutrally. Victoria turned her attention back to Eliza. "Your father is beside himself. The Sinclairs are furious. Robert has retreated to the Hamptons to avoid the press. Do you have any idea of the damage you've caused?" "To what? The family reputation? The merger plans?" Eliza's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm sorry if my decision to avoid a lifetime of misery has inconvenienced everyone." Victoria flinched as if slapped. "Is that how you see it? Everything we've done, the opportunities we've provided, the connections we've made, you view it all as some sort of prison?" "What would you call it?" Eliza challenged. "A life where every choice is made for me, where my opinions are irrelevant, where I exist solely to advance Father's business interests." Jack shifted uncomfortably, feeling like an intruder in a deeply personal conversation. "Maybe I should give you two some privacy." "Please stay," Eliza said quickly, her hand brushing his arm. "I'd like you to hear this." Victoria's gaze flickered to the brief contact, a new calculation entering her expression. "I see. Well, that certainly explains a few things." "It's not what you're thinking," Eliza said, color rising in her cheeks. "Mr. Miller has been kind enough to offer me shelter while I figure out my next steps. That's all." "Of course," Victoria replied, clearly unconvinced. "Regardless, I've come to bring you home. Your father has agreed to call off the wedding, at least temporarily. We can issue a statement about a postponement due to health concerns. In a few months, once the gossip dies down—" "You're not listening, Mother," Eliza interrupted. "I'm not coming back. Not to Chicago, not to that life, and certainly not to a rescheduled wedding to a man who sees me as a business transaction." Victoria pressed her lips together, visibly struggling to maintain her composure. "Where exactly do you plan to go, Eliza? What do you plan to do? You have no career, no real-world experience. Your trust fund remains under your father's control until you're 35 or married. I have my grandmother's money. A pittance compared to what you're giving up. But it's mine," Eliza said firmly, "with no strings attached." Victoria sighed, her perfect facade cracking to reveal genuine concern beneath. "Darling, please. This rebellion, it's understandable. The pressure of the wedding, the media attention, it would strain anyone. But throwing away everything over pre-wedding jitters is madness. It's not jitters when you know in your heart that you're making a terrible mistake," Eliza replied softly. "Deep down you know that too, don't you, Mother?" Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, recognition perhaps, or a long-buried regret. For a moment, Jack thought he glimpsed the small-town girl who'd married an ambitious young engineer, before wealth and status had reshaped her into the polished society matron who stood before them. "Your father," Victoria began, then faltered. She glanced at Jack, then back to her daughter. "He's already filed an injunction against the release of your grandmother's trust. His lawyers believe they can make a case that you're acting under duress or undue influence." Her gaze drifted meaningfully to Jack. Eliza's face drained of color. "He can't do that. Grandmother's will was explicit." "You know your father, darling. He doesn't accept defeat gracefully." Victoria reached into her handbag and withdrew a thick envelope. "I brought this for you. It's not much. 10,000 in cash, a prepaid phone, and the deed to the lake house in Wisconsin. It's still in my name, not your father's." Eliza stared at the envelope, confusion written across her face. "I don't understand." "Insurance," Victoria said simply, "in case things don't go the way Richard expects them to." She pressed the envelope into Eliza's hands. "I may not agree with your choices, Eliza, but She paused, swallowing hard. "I never wanted the life I've led for you." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Jack looked away, giving mother and daughter a moment of privacy in this strangely public confession. "Why are you doing this?" Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria straightened, her mask slipping back into place. "Because you're my daughter, and because once, a very long time ago, I stood at a crossroads like the one you're facing now. I made my choice, and I've lived with it." She glanced at Jack, then back to Eliza. "Make sure whatever choice you make is truly yours." With that cryptic advice, Victoria kissed her daughter's cheek and turned to go. At the bottom of the steps, she paused, looking back at Jack. "Mr. Miller, whatever my husband may have implied yesterday, the Prescott family has no quarrel with you. But you should know, Richard rarely makes idle threats." Before Jack could respond, Victoria was back in the SUV, pulling away in another cloud of dust, leaving them in stunned silence. "Well," Jack said finally, "that wasn't what I expected." Eliza stared at the envelope in her hands, looking shell-shocked. "That makes two of us." They retreated to the kitchen, where Jack put on a fresh pot of coffee more out of habit than necessity. Eliza sat at the table, the envelope untouched before her. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, setting a steaming mug in front of her. "I'm not sure," Eliza admitted. "In my entire life, I've never seen my mother defy my father. Not once." She looked up, her expression troubled. "It scares me, honestly. If she's worried enough to bring me this..." She gestured to the envelope. "Your father must be really pulling out all the stops. You don't know the half of it." Eliza opened the envelope, quickly counting the cash before examining the deed to the lake house. "This place was my grandmother's originally. I spent summers there as a child, before everything changed. Sounds like your mother is trying to protect you in her own way." "Yes, but from what?" Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she repacked the envelope. "Jack, I'm starting to think I've dragged you into something more complicated than either of us realized." Jack shrugged, his expression calm. "Life's complicated. Doesn't mean you run from it. But this isn't your fight. My father, his lawyers, the media attention that will inevitably follow. You didn't sign up for any of that." "True," Jack acknowledged. "But I did offer you a place to stay while you figure things out. That offer still stands." Eliza studied him, her blue eyes searching his face as if looking for some hidden agenda. "Why? Why would you put yourself in the crosshairs of a man like Richard Prescott for someone you barely know?" Jack considered the question, wondering himself at the protective instinct that had awakened in him since Eliza had appeared on his road in her bedraggled wedding dress. "Maybe I recognize a bit of myself in you," he said finally. "After Sarah died, I was lost, had to rebuild my whole life, figure out who I was without her. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most important." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Everyone deserves the space to find themselves, Eliza, even billionaires' daughters." A smile touched her lips, small but genuine. "Even ornery farmers deserve some peace in their lives. I don't want to bring chaos to yours." "Chaos already came knocking when you slid into that ditch," Jack pointed out with a wry smile. "Might as well see it through." Eliza laughed, the sound brightening the kitchen. "Well, when you put it that way." The moment was interrupted by Jack's border collie, Maggie, scratching at the door. Jack let her in, and the dog immediately went to Eliza, resting her head on the young woman's knee and gazing up with soulful eyes. "She likes you," Jack observed, surprised. Maggie was usually wary of strangers. Eliza scratched behind the dog's ears, earning a look of canine bliss. "The feeling is mutual. We had dogs when I was little, before we moved to the penthouse. Father said they were too messy, too inconvenient. Well, farm dogs are definitely messy, Jack warned, and they have an uncanny ability to find the muddiest puddle right before they want to greet you. Sounds perfect, Eliza replied, and Jack could see she meant it. So you're staying? Eliza nodded, a new determination in her eyes. If you'll have me, just until I figure out my next move. In that case, Jack said, glancing at the clock, you might want to change into something more practical. Afternoon milking starts in an hour, and if you're going to learn farm life, there's no time like the present. Milking? As in actual cows? Unless you'd prefer to start with the chickens? Eliza's expression was a comical mixture of trepidation and excitement. Cows it is. As she hurried upstairs to change, Jack found himself smiling. The quiet routine of his solitary life had been thoroughly disrupted, and strangely, he didn't mind at all. There was something about Eliza Prescott that brought light into rooms that had been dark for too long. Of course, there would be consequences. Richard Prescott wasn't a man who accepted defeat, and Victoria's unexpected intervention suggested troubles ahead that neither of them could fully anticipate. But for now, for this afternoon at least, they would milk cows and mend fences and pretend that the outside world, with all its complications and threats, couldn't touch them here. I don't think Chanel ever designed for this particular activity, Eliza joked, gesturing to her borrowed jeans and flannel shirt as they entered the milking barn. The sweet, earthy smell of hay and cattle filled the air, so different from the carefully controlled environment she'd grown up in. Jack's small dairy operation consisted of 12 jerseys, their caramel-colored coats gleaming in the afternoon light that streamed through the barn windows. The cows regarded Eliza with placid curiosity as she followed Jack down the center aisle. "This is Buttercup," Jack said, stopping beside a particularly large cow with soulful brown eyes. "She's gentle and patient, perfect for beginners." Eliza eyed the animal with a mixture of trepidation and determination. "She's bigger than I expected." "Most things in real life are," Jack observed with a hint of amusement. "City folks tend to have a children's book version of farm animals in their heads." "Guilty as charged," Eliza admitted. "The closest I've come to a cow is the organic, grass-fed beef my father's chef prepares for dinner parties." Jack winced. "Maybe don't mention that to Buttercup. She's sensitive." The joke broke the tension, and Eliza found herself laughing, a genuine, unguarded sound that surprised her. When was the last time she'd laughed like that? Not the polite, measured chuckle of charity galas and business dinners, but an actual spontaneous expression of joy. Under Jack's patient guidance, Eliza learned the basics of milking. First observing the automated system he used for efficiency, then trying her hand at the traditional method when Jack demonstrated on a separate cow. "Like this?" she asked, her first attempts clumsy and ineffective. "Close," Jack said, standing behind her and gently adjusting her grip. "It's all in the rhythm. Not too hard, not too soft." Eliza was acutely aware of his proximity, the solid warmth of him just inches away, his calloused hands briefly covering hers to demonstrate the proper technique. There was nothing remotely romantic about the setting, the earthy smells of the barn, the occasional impatient moo from a waiting cow, yet she felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. When at last a steady stream of milk hit the pail, Eliza let out a triumphant whoop that startled the nearby cows. "I did it!" "That you did," Jack confirmed, his smile warm with approval. "You're a natural." The simple praise filled her with a disproportionate sense of accomplishment. All her life, she'd received accolades for things that came easily to her: grades at exclusive schools, social graces at important functions, looking beautiful at charity events. But this small victory, this new skill acquired through instruction and effort, felt more meaningful than any of those polished achievements. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of new experiences. After milking came feeding the chickens, collecting eggs. Eliza's delighted discovery of a still warm egg in the nesting box was, Jack thought, one of the most genuinely joyful reactions he'd ever witnessed. And a tour of the vegetable garden where Jack grew produce for the local farmers market. By the time they returned to the house for dinner, Eliza was exhausted, dirty, and exhilarated. She'd never worked so hard physically in her life, and yet she felt strangely energized, her mind clearer than it had been in months. "I must look a fright," she said, catching sight of her reflection in the kitchen window, hair escaping its ponytail, a smudge of dirt across one cheek, her borrowed clothes rumpled and stained. "You look like someone who's done an honest day's work," Jack replied, and something in his tone made her believe it was the highest compliment he could give. Over a simple dinner of roast chicken and vegetables from Jack's garden, Eliza found herself sharing stories she hadn't thought about in years. Summers at her grandmother's lake house before the Prescott fortune changed everything, a beloved elementary school teacher who'd encouraged her interest in science, the stray dog she'd secretly fed until her father discovered it and had it removed. In turn, Jack spoke of Sarah, how they'd met in high school, her dreams of becoming a writer, her battle with the cancer that ultimately took her life. He talked about raising Emily alone, the terror and pride of sending her off to college, the quiet that had settled over the farm in her absence. "Do you ever get lonely?" Eliza asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. "I'm sorry, that's too personal." "It's a fair question," Jack said, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, I get lonely. But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Most days I'm just alone." Eliza nodded, understanding more than she could express. She'd felt profoundly lonely her entire adult life, surrounded by people, but never truly seen by any of them. Here, in this simple farmhouse with this quiet, steady man, she felt more truly herself than she had in years. After dinner, as they washed dishes side by side, Jack nodded toward the small television in the corner of the living room. "Should probably check the news, see what we're up against." The local station was just finishing a weather report when they settled on the sofa. The anchor's expression turned serious as she transitioned to the next story. In business news, Prescott energy stocks fell sharply today following the last-minute cancellation of CEO Richard Prescott's daughter's wedding to Robert Sinclair, heir to Sinclair Investments. Sources close to the family deny rumors of a rift between the two powerful business dynasties, attributing the postponement to health concerns. However, insider reports suggest... Jack switched off the television, glancing at Eliza. "You okay?" She nodded, though her expression was troubled. "It's strange, seeing your personal life reduced to a business report. Prescott stocks fell. As if my decision not to marry a man I don't love is nothing more than a quarterly earnings disappointment." "To your father, maybe it is," Jack observed. "Men like Richard Prescott tend to see everything in terms of assets and liabilities. Including their daughters," Eliza agreed bitterly. Before Jack could respond, his cell phone rang, a rare enough occurrence that they both started at the sound. He checked the screen, brow furrowing in confusion before answering. "Hello? Yes, this is Jack Miller." His expression darkened as he listened. "I see. No, that's not... Yes, I understand. Thank you for letting me know." He hung up, his face grim. "What is it?" Eliza asked, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. "That was my loan officer at First Farmers Bank. Apparently there's been an offer to buy my mortgage, for twice what I owe." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "My father." Jack nodded slowly. "That would be my guess. The bank is giving me a courtesy heads up, but they can't legally refuse such an offer." "What does that mean for you? For the farm?" "It means Richard Prescott would become effectively my landlord. He could call in the loan any time, demand immediate repayment." Jack's voice was steady, but Eliza could see the tension in his jaw, the tightening around his eyes. I'd have to sell, likely at a loss given the forced timeline. He's trying to force me out, Eliza whispered, horrified. By threatening your livelihood. This is all my fault. No, Jack said firmly. This is Richard Prescott showing exactly who he is, and it's not your responsibility. Eliza stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. I should leave. If I go back to Chicago, face my father directly, and give him exactly what he wants? Jack shook his head. Eliza, men like your father don't stop once they get a taste of victory. You go back now, under duress, and you'll never break free. But your farm has weathered worse than Richard Prescott, Jack assured her, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Besides, we don't know for certain it's him. Don't we? Eliza's voice was bitter. This has his fingerprints all over it. The timing, the calculated precision of the attack. He's sending me a message. Jack rose, crossing to where she stood by the window. Then maybe we should send one back. Eliza looked up at him, surprised by the steel in his voice. What do you mean? I mean your father isn't the only one who can make strategic moves. Jack's expression was resolute. My neighbor, Tom Bradley, has been after me to sell him my back 40 for years. Wants to expand his corn operation. If I sell to him now, I can pay off the mortgage entirely. Your father would be buying an empty note. You'd sell part of your farm? For me? Eliza stared at him, stunned by the offer. Jack, I can't let you do that. This land has been in your family for generations. The land doesn't make the farm, Eliza. The work does. The care does. His gaze was steady, unwavering. And I'd rather sell 40 acres than have Richard Prescott holding the deed to all 80. Eliza felt something shift between them in that moment. A deepening of connection, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended their brief acquaintance. We need a better plan, she said finally. Something that doesn't involve you sacrificing your heritage. I'm open to suggestions, Jack replied with a hint of his dry humor. Eliza's phone chimed from her pocket, the prepaid one her mother had given her, not her regular cell which remained powered off. She checked the screen, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. It's my mother, she said, scanning the text message. She says my father is flying to Cedar Rapids tomorrow morning. He's coming here personally. Jack's eyes met hers, concern evident. Then we have until tomorrow to figure out our next move. Eliza nodded, a new determination hardening within her. Her father had escalated this from a family disagreement to economic warfare. If that's how he wanted to play it, fine. She wasn't a naive debutante anymore, and she wasn't alone. I need to make a call, she said suddenly. There's someone who might be able to help us. As the night deepened around the farmhouse, Eliza and Jack sat at the kitchen table, formulating a plan to stand against one of the most powerful men in the country, a man who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with money or influence. Until now. Dawn broke over the farm in hues of pink and gold, finding Eliza already awake, sitting on the porch steps with a steaming mug of coffee cradled in her hands. She'd slept fitfully, her dreams a chaotic jumble of wedding dresses and foreclosure notices, her father's cold eyes watching her from every shadow. The screen door creaked behind her as Jack emerged, his own coffee in hand. Without a word, he settled beside her on the step, the comfortable silence of people who have weathered a crisis together enveloping them. Did you sleep at all? He asked finally. A little, Eliza admitted. You? Jack shrugged. Enough. They watched the sun climb higher, painting the cornfields in warm light. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, unaware of the human drama unfolding around them. Your friend, Jack began carefully, the one you called last night. You think she can really help? Eliza nodded. If anyone can, it's Meredith. We were roommates at Wellesley before. She trailed off, then continued. Before Father decided college was distracting me from more important social connections. Meredith went on to become an investigative journalist. She specializes in corporate corruption. And she's willing to go up against Richard Prescott? That's a powerful enemy to make. Meredith's been trying to crack the Prescott empire for years, Eliza explained. But my father's careful. His public image is impeccable. Philanthropist, job creator, environmental innovator. Her mouth twisted in a humorless smile. The real stories stay buried under mountains of NDAs and sealed court documents. Until now, Jack observed. Until now, Eliza agreed. Meredith is driving up from Chicago as we speak. She should be here by noon. Jack nodded slowly. And you're sure about this? Once this bell is rung, it can't be unrung. Eliza's expression hardened. My father crossed a line when he came after your farm. If it's war he wants, I'm done playing defense. The fierce determination in her voice stirred something in Jack. Admiration, certainly. But also a protective instinct he hadn't felt since Emily was small. Well then, he said, rising to his feet, if we're preparing for battle, we should at least do it on a full stomach. How do you feel about learning to make pancakes? The question was so unexpected, so charmingly domestic amid their talk of corporate warfare, that Eliza couldn't help but laugh. I've never made pancakes before. Jack's eyebrows shot up. Never? Not even as a kid? We had a chef, Eliza reminded him. Besides, my mother doesn't believe in carbs. No wonder you ran away, Jack muttered, holding the door open for her. Consider this your first lesson in essential life skills. The kitchen quickly became a chaos of flour and batter as Jack taught Eliza the simple art of pancake making. She proved to be an eager but somewhat haphazard student, and they were both laughing as she flipped her first pancake with more enthusiasm than precision, sending it flopping half onto the skillet, half onto the stovetop. Not bad for a first attempt, Jack encouraged, helping her rescue the misshapen pancake. The secret is in the wrist. Like milking cows? Eliza asked, attempting a second flip with marginally better results. Exactly. Most physical skills come down to the same basics: patience, rhythm, and knowing when to apply pressure. Their eyes met briefly over the stovetop, and something electric passed between them, a moment of connection that transcended their current predicament. Then, the pancake began to smoke, breaking the spell as they both lunged to save breakfast. By the time they'd cleaned up the kitchen and Jack had headed out to do the morning chores, with Eliza insisting on accompanying him, despite his protests that she should rest, it was mid-morning. They were in the barn, Jack showing Eliza how to mend a broken stall door, when the sound of an approaching vehicle caught their attention. Expecting someone? Eliza asked, tensing immediately. Jack checked his watch. Too early for your friend, and that doesn't sound like my neighbor's truck. They moved to the barn door together, peering out cautiously. A mud-splattered pickup was pulling up the driveway, nowhere near as sleek or threatening as the Prescott family vehicles. It's Martha, Jack said, visibly relaxing. Martha Henshaw, the town gossip I warned you about. Eliza's heart, which had been racing with adrenaline, gradually slowed. What's she doing here? Reconnaissance, most likely. News of your car in the ditch must have made the rounds. Jack sighed. Brace yourself. Martha's intense. Martha Henshaw proved to be a whirlwind in human form, a short, plump woman in her 60s with henned hair and a floral print dress that somehow managed to complement her rubber barn boots. She burst from her truck with the energy of someone half her age, bearing a covered dish and an unmistakable air of curiosity. Jack Miller, don't you think for 1 minute you can hide a mysterious city woman on your farm without the whole town talking? She called by way of greeting. Jack stepped forward to intercept her, accepting the dish with resigned familiarity. Morning, Martha. What brings you all the way out here? Chicken casserole, of course. Can't have your guests thinking country folk don't know how to welcome strangers. Martha peered around him, spotting Eliza in the barn doorway. There she is. Come out here, honey, let me get a look at you. Eliza emerged hesitantly, uncomfortably aware of her work-rumpled appearance and the sawdust clinging to her borrowed jeans. Martha Henshaw, this is Eliza, Jack introduced them, deliberately omitting her last name. She's staying with me for a while. Martha's sharp eyes missed nothing as she assessed Eliza from head to toe. Bill Henderson said you pulled a fancy white car out of a ditch, but he didn't mention how pretty the driver was. She turned to Jack with a knowing smile. No wonder you've been keeping her to yourself. It's not like that, Jack protested, the tips of his ears turning red. Eliza needed a place to stay while she sorts out some personal matters. Of course, Martha agreed with a wink that suggested she believed no such thing. Well, personal matters or not, you're welcome in Riverdale, honey. Any friend of Jack's is a friend of ours. The warmth of the welcome, however invasive, touched Eliza unexpectedly. Thank you, that's very kind. Not kind, just neighborly, Martha corrected. Speaking of which, I should warn you too. There's been talk in town this morning. Strangers asking questions about Jack's farm, about a young woman who might be staying here. Her expression grew serious. Men in suits, not local. Didn't like the look of them myself. Jack and Eliza exchanged alarmed glances. What kind of questions? Jack asked, his voice carefully neutral. Oh, the usual. Where's the farm located exactly? How long have you owned it? That sort of thing. Martha's eyes narrowed. I may have sent them on a wild goose chase up to Pine Ridge. Told them that was where Jack Miller's place was. She sniffed. Never did trust men who wear sunglasses indoors. Thank you, Martha, Eliza said with genuine gratitude. That was incredibly helpful. Well, we look after our own around here, Martha replied, patting Eliza's arm as if she'd already been granted honorary local status. Now, that casserole needs about 20 minutes in the oven at 350. And Jack, Tom Bradley was asking after you at the diner this morning. Something about being interested in that back section of yours? Jack nodded. I'll give him a call. You do that. Martha headed back to her truck, then paused. Oh, and Jack? If those men in suits come around again, you might want to have Sheriff Davis's number handy. Just a thought. As Martha's truck disappeared down the driveway, Eliza turned to Jack, her expression a mixture of amazement and concern. Are all your neighbors so nosy, protective? Yes to both, Jack confirmed with a rueful smile. Small town life, no privacy but plenty of backup when you need it. They're already looking for me, Eliza said quietly. My father's people. We knew they would be, but Martha just bought us some time. Jack checked his watch again. Your friend should be here soon. Let's finish up these chores and then figure out our next move. They worked side by side in companionable focus, Jack showing Eliza how to complete the stall repair, then moving on to feed the chickens and check the vegetable garden. Despite the tension of their situation, there was something deeply satisfying about the work. Tangible problems with concrete solutions, so different from the complex web of power and influence they were preparing to confront. Around noon, the sound of another vehicle approaching set them both on edge again. This time, it was a modest blue sedan, driven by a woman with short, dark hair and an air of purposeful energy that was visible even from a distance. That's Meredith, Eliza confirmed, relief evident in her voice. Meredith Chen emerged from her car with a laptop bag slung over one shoulder and a rolling suitcase in tow. She embraced Eliza tightly, then stepped back to study her friend's face. Farm life agrees with you, she observed with a hint of surprise. You look more alive than I've seen you in years. It's only been 2 days, Eliza protested, but she couldn't help smiling. Meredith turned her assessing gaze to Jack. So you're the farmer who rescued the runaway bride. I've been following the chatter on social media. You're quite the topic of speculation in certain circles. Jack looked uncomfortable with this information. Jack Miller, he said simply, extending his hand. Thanks for coming. Meredith Chen. And I should be thanking you. She shook his hand firmly. What you did took courage. Stopping to help someone in a ditch isn't courage, Jack replied. It's basic human decency. Standing up to Richard Prescott, however, is another matter entirely, Meredith countered. Which is why I'm here. She patted her laptop bag. I brought reinforcements. Inside the farmhouse, Meredith wasted no time setting up her laptop at the kitchen table. Richard Prescott arrives at Cedar Rapids Airport at 2:30 p.m., she informed them, typing rapidly. Private jet, of course. I have a source at the airport who confirmed his flight plan. That gives us a couple of hours, Jack noted, glancing at the clock. To do what exactly? Eliza asked, the anxiety she'd been suppressing all morning finally breaking through. My father has every advantage: money, influence, an army of lawyers. What can we possibly do to stop him? We can't stop him from coming, Meredith agreed. But we can change the dynamics of the confrontation. She turned her laptop screen toward them, revealing a series of documents, spreadsheets, and what appeared to be internal memos with the Prescott Energy letterhead. These were leaked to me 6 months ago by a whistleblower inside your father's company. I haven't been able to use them because I couldn't verify their authenticity. Until now, Eliza breathed, scanning the documents with growing comprehension. Because I can verify them. Meredith nodded. Exactly. With your confirmation, these become a legitimate exposé rather than speculative journalism based on unverified leaks. What exactly are we looking at here? Jack asked, leaning closer to the screen. Evidence that Prescott Energy has been systematically falsifying environmental impact reports on their drilling operations, Meredith explained. Particularly in sensitive areas like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the same area Richard was offering drilling rights to as part of Eliza's wedding package deal. That's why he was so insistent on the Sinclair match, Eliza realized, the pieces falling into place. Robert's father sits on the committee that approves those permits. The merger wasn't just about business connections, it was about securing regulatory approval. And that's just the beginning, Meredith said grimly. There's evidence here of tax evasion, bribery of officials, and potential violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in at least 3 countries. Jack whistled low. No wonder your father is pulling out all the stops to bring you back into the fold. You're not just an asset to him now. You're a potential liability. So what's the plan? Eliza asked, a new determination hardening her voice. How do we use this? Meredith's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. We make sure Richard Prescott knows exactly what's at stake when he arrives. This isn't just about you anymore, Eliza. This is about the empire he's built on lies and corruption, an empire that could come crashing down with a single press conference. Jack looked between the two women, concern etching his features. You're talking about blackmailing one of the most powerful men in the country. Not blackmail, Meredith corrected. Leverage. There's a difference. A legal difference, maybe, Jack conceded. But the practical consequences could be the same, Eliza finished for him. It's dangerous, I know, but so is letting my father continue unchecked. She turned to Jack, her expression apologetic. I'm sorry to bring this fight to your doorstep. Jack's response was interrupted by the distant sound of helicopter rotors, growing louder by the second. All 3 rushed to the window in time to see a sleek black helicopter descending toward the open field adjacent to the farmhouse. That's not scheduled for another 2 hours, Meredith said, her expression grim. My father never was one for sticking to other people's timetables, Eliza replied, watching as the Prescott Energy logo became visible on the helicopter's side. Looks like our confrontation just got moved up. Jack's hand found hers, warm and reassuring. Whatever happens next, we face it together. As the helicopter touched down, Kicking up swirls of dust in the summer air, Eliza squared her shoulders. The moment of reckoning had arrived sooner than expected, but she was ready. No longer the dutiful daughter or the perfect Prescott princess, but a woman prepared to stand her ground, with unexpected allies by her side and truth as her weapon. The helicopter's rotors slowed, but didn't stop completely, creating a persistent thrum that vibrated through the farmhouse. Through the window they watched as Richard Prescott emerged, followed by two men in dark suits, one carrying a briefcase, the other scanning the property with the practiced eye of a security professional. "He's brought the cavalry," Meredith observed, quickly gathering her documents and closing her laptop. Classic intimidation tactic. "It won't work," Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Not anymore." Jack moved to stand beside her. "Want me to ask them to leave? It's private property." "No," Eliza touched his arm gently. "This confrontation is inevitable. Better to face it head on." They stepped onto the porch, just as Richard Prescott reached the bottom of the steps, his tailored suit and polished appearance as impeccable as ever, despite having just stepped off a helicopter in the middle of rural Iowa. "Eliza," he acknowledged, his voice betraying no emotion. His gaze shifted to Jack, then to Meredith, his expression hardening slightly. "Ms. Chen, I didn't expect to find you here." "Mr. Prescott," Meredith replied with professional detachment. "Always a pleasure." Richard returned his attention to his daughter. "This has gone on long enough, Eliza. It's time to come home." "I'm not going anywhere, Father." Eliza's voice was quiet but firm. "And sending your people to intimidate Jack's neighbors was a new low, even for you." A flicker of surprise crossed Richard's face, quickly masked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Men in suits asking questions in town," Jack elaborated, his tone deliberately casual. "We look after our own around here, Mr. Prescott. Your scouts were sent on a wild goose chase." Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He gestured to the man with the briefcase, who stepped forward and opened it, extracting a document. "Mr. Miller," Richard said, his business persona fully in place now, "I've taken the liberty of purchasing your mortgage from First Farmers Bank. Given the current economic climate, I'm exercising my right as the note holder to call in the loan. You have 30 days to repay in full, or foreclosure proceedings will begin." Eliza felt Jack stiffen beside her, but his expression remained neutral. "That's mighty generous of you," he said, his voice laced with irony. "Most folks would give 90 days at least." "I'm not most people," Richard replied coldly. "No, you're not," Eliza interjected, her anger rising. "Most people have basic decency. Most people don't use their wealth to bully and intimidate. Most people don't view their own children as business assets to be leveraged." Richard's expression darkened. "That's enough, Eliza. You've had your little rebellion, made your point. This childish defiance ends now." "Or what?" Eliza challenged. "You'll destroy Jack's livelihood? Ruin his life to punish me?" She stepped closer to her father, emboldened by the evidence Meredith had shown her. "Tell me, Father, how do you think the press would react to the full story? Billionaire CEO Richard Prescott harasses innocent farmer to force his daughter into an unwanted marriage? It's like something out of the 19th century. "Don't threaten me, Eliza," Richard warned, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "You're out of your depth." "Am I?" Eliza nodded to Meredith, who produced her laptop and turned it to face Richard. On the screen was the first page of the leaked Prescott Energy documents, the company letterhead prominently displayed above damning evidence of environmental report falsification. The color drained from Richard's face. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" Meredith asked smoothly. "What matters is that we have it. All of it. The falsified environmental impact reports, the bribes to officials in the Arctic Permitting Office, the tax evasion through shell companies in the Caymans." She paused, letting each accusation land like a blow. Quite the reading material. Richard's gaze locked on his daughter, a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect flickering in his eyes. "You're blackmailing me." "I prefer to think of it as negotiating," Eliza replied, echoing Meredith's earlier words. "From a position of strength for once." The security professional took a step forward, but Richard held up a hand, stopping him. "What do you want?" "First, you will transfer Jack's mortgage back to First Farmers Bank, with the original terms restored," Eliza stated clearly. "Second, you will cease all attempts to force me back to Chicago or into any marriage. Third, you will release my grandmother's trust fund as stipulated in her will. No legal challenges, no delays." Richard's eyes narrowed. "And in return?" "In return, these documents stay private, for now." Eliza maintained eye contact with her father, refusing to be intimidated. "I have no desire to destroy the company, Father. Too many innocent people depend on Prescott Energy for their livelihoods, but I will not allow you to use your power to control my life any longer." A tense silence fell over the group, broken only by the idling helicopter's persistent hum. Richard Prescott was not a man accustomed to defeat, yet he found himself cornered by his own daughter, a daughter who had clearly inherited more of his strategic mind than he'd given her credit for. "You've changed," he observed finally, his tone unreadable. "Yes," Eliza agreed simply. "I have." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of another vehicle, a rental car pulling up the driveway, dust billowing in its wake. Victoria Prescott emerged, looking harried and uncharacteristically disheveled. "Richard," she called, hurrying toward them. "Stop this madness immediately." Richard turned, visibly startled by his wife's appearance. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "Preventing you from making the biggest mistake of your life," she replied, coming to stand between her husband and daughter. She turned to Eliza. "I tried to call, to warn you he was coming early, but you didn't answer." "I turned the phone off," Eliza admitted. "I'm sorry." Victoria shook her head. "It doesn't matter now." She faced Richard, her spine straight, her voice steady in a way Eliza had rarely heard. "Richard, I've stood by you for 30 years. I've watched you build an empire, and I've watched that empire slowly consume the man I married. But I will not stand by while you destroy our daughter's chance at happiness." Richard stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time in years. "Victoria, you don't understand what's at stake." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted. "I've always understood. I just chose to look the other way, to numb myself with pills and charity functions rather than face what our life had become." She gestured toward the farmhouse, the fields beyond. "Look around you, Richard. Our daughter found something real here, something honest. When was the last time we could say the same about our lives?" The raw emotion in Victoria's voice seemed to penetrate Richard's carefully constructed facade. For a brief moment, Eliza glimpsed the father she remembered from childhood, the man who had taught her to fish, who had carried her on his shoulders through their first small house before success had changed everything. "The company," Richard began, but Victoria cut him off again. "The company will survive one way or another, but our family might not." She took his hand, a gesture so unexpected that Richard didn't pull away. "It's time to let go, Richard. Let Eliza find her own path." Richard looked from his wife to his daughter, then to the document still in his associate's hand. The calculation was visible in his eyes, weighing options, considering angles, assessing risks as he'd done countless times in business. "The documents," he said finally, turning to Meredith. "How many copies?" "Enough," she replied simply. "In secure locations." Richard nodded, seeming to reach a decision. "I want your word, Eliza. As long as I meet your terms, those documents remain private." "You have it," Eliza promised. "Unless you force my hand." After another long moment, Richard gestured to his associate, who reluctantly closed the briefcase. "I'll have the mortgage transferred back by close of business today. The trust fund, That will take a few days to untangle the legal holds." "Thank you," Eliza said, relief washing over her. But Richard wasn't finished. His expression hardened once more as he looked at Jack. "Understand this, Mr. Miller. My daughter may think she wants this rustic existence now, the novelty of physical labor and simple living. But Eliza is a Prescott. Sooner or later she'll remember who she really is and what she's giving up." His gaze returned to Eliza, something almost like concern in his eyes. "And when that happens, when you realize what you've thrown away, there won't be a place for you back in our world." "Richard!" Victoria protested, but Eliza stepped forward. "Is that a threat, Father?" she asked quietly. "No," he replied with unexpected candor. "It's a warning, from someone who knows exactly how hard it is to live without the privileges you've taken for granted your entire life." He straightened his tie, composure fully restored. "Make your choice with open eyes, Eliza. That's all I ask." With that, Richard turned and walked back toward the helicopter, his associates falling in behind him. Victoria hesitated, torn between husband and daughter. "Go with him, Mother," Eliza said gently. "He needs you more than I do right now." Victoria embraced her daughter quickly. "I'll call you when the trust fund is released," she whispered. "Be happy, darling. That's all I've ever wanted for you." As the helicopter lifted off, carrying the Prescotts back into the sky, Jack, Eliza, and Meredith stood in silence, watching until it was nothing more than a distant speck against the vast Iowa sky. "Did we just win?" Jack asked finally, seeming almost dazed by the sudden resolution. "For now," Meredith cautioned. "Richard Prescott doesn't concede defeat easily. He's retreating, not surrendering." Eliza nodded, understanding her father better than most. "He'll regroup, reassess. But he'll keep his word about the mortgage and the trust fund. His pride wouldn't allow anything less." Jack studied her face. "What about his warning? About remembering who you really are?" Eliza turned to him, the sunset painting her features in warm gold. "That's just it, Jack. For the first time in years, I'm starting to remember exactly who I really am, and it has nothing to do with the Prescott name or fortune." As they walked back to the farmhouse together, the immediate danger past but the future still uncertain, Eliza felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The confrontation with her father had drained her, yet standing her ground, speaking her truth, had awakened something long dormant within her. A sense of her own power, her own worth beyond the Prescott legacy. What came next, she couldn't say. But for the first time in her adult life, the uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. The days following Richard Prescott's dramatic departure unfolded with a dreamlike quality for Eliza. True to his word, her father had the mortgage returned to First Farmers Bank that same day. 3 days later, Victoria called to confirm that the legal holds on Eliza's trust fund had been lifted. Just like that, Eliza found herself truly free for the first time in her adult life, financially independent, unencumbered by family expectations, and faced with the dizzying prospect of charting her own course. Meredith had returned to Chicago the day after the confrontation, armed with a handwritten statement from Eliza confirming the authenticity of the Prescott energy documents, but promising not to publish as long as Richard kept his end of the bargain. "Keep them somewhere safe," Eliza had instructed her friend. "Insurance, just in case." "Always," Meredith had agreed, embracing her tightly before departing. "And Eliza, I'm proud of you. Standing up to Richard Prescott is no small feat, even with leverage." Now, a week after the helicopter had disappeared into the horizon, Eliza stood in Jack's vegetable garden, dirt under her fingernails, sweat beading on her forehead, feeling more alive than she could remember. The simple rhythm of farm work, the daily chores, the physical exhaustion, the tangible results of her labor, had become a kind of therapy, washing away years of cultivated passivity. "You're getting good at that," Jack observed, leaning against the garden fence as Eliza methodically weeded a row of tomato plants. "Most city folks give up after the first blister." Eliza smiled, holding up her hands to display the calluses forming on her once manicured fingers. "I think I'm officially disqualified from most city folks' status at this point." Jack laughed, the sound still rare enough to make Eliza's heart skip. In the days since her father's visit, something had shifted between them, a growing ease, a deepening connection that neither had acknowledged directly, but both felt acutely. "Martha's been by the store 3 times asking when you're coming to town," Jack mentioned, changing the subject. "I think she's organized an unofficial welcome committee." "Is that a subtle hint that I should stop hiding out at the farm?" Eliza asked, brushing dirt from her knees as she stood. "Not hiding," Jack corrected. "Regrouping. There's a difference." The distinction was kind, but not entirely accurate. Eliza had been avoiding town, using the farm as a sanctuary while she processed everything that had happened and tried to decide what came next. The problem was, the more days that passed, the less certain she became about leaving. "I should go into town," she agreed finally. "I need to start looking for a place of my own anyway. I can't keep imposing on your hospitality forever." Something flickered across Jack's face. Disappointment, perhaps, but he masked it quickly. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. The farm's big enough for 2. The casual offer hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. Eliza's cheeks warmed, and she busied herself with gathering the weeds she'd pulled. "That's generous of you," she said carefully. "But I should probably start standing on my own 2 feet. Isn't that what this was all about?" Jack nodded, his expression unreadable. "Fair enough. We can head into town tomorrow if you'd like. Farmer's market day. You can help me sell these tomatoes you've been tending so carefully." "I'd like that," Eliza replied, surprised by how much she meant it. That evening they sat on the porch after dinner, watching fireflies dance over the darkening fields. The summer heat had given way to a gentle coolness, and the first stars were appearing in the twilight sky. Jack handed Eliza a glass of homemade lemonade, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "I got a call from Emily today," he said, settling into the rocking chair beside her. "She's thinking of coming home for a long weekend next month." "That's wonderful," Eliza replied sincerely. She'd heard so much about Jack's daughter that she felt she knew her already. "Will she be shocked to find you harboring a fugitive from high society?" Jack chuckled. "Emily doesn't shock easily, but she is curious about you. Asked a lot of questions." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that you needed a place to land and the farm had room." He took a sip of his lemonade, then added quietly, "And that you've brought something back to this place that's been missing for a long time." Eliza turned to him, heart suddenly racing. "What's that?" Jack's eyes met hers in the gathering darkness. "Life. Laughter." He paused. "Hope." The moment stretched between them, electric with possibility. Eliza found herself leaning toward him almost involuntarily, drawn by the quiet strength and genuine goodness she'd discovered in this man who had changed her life with a simple act of kindness. The shrill ring of the telephone shattered the moment. Jack held her gaze for a heartbeat longer before rising to answer it, disappearing into the house. Eliza released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her emotions a tumultuous mix of disappointment and relief. What was happening between them? And what would it mean for her newfound independence if she allowed these feelings to develop? Jack returned a few minutes later, his expression troubled. "Everything okay?" Eliza asked, instantly alert. "That was Tom Bradley, my neighbor who's been interested in the back 40. Jack settled back into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "He's withdrawing his offer." "What? Why?" "Seems he got a call from a Chicago investment firm, warning him off. Said there might be environmental complications with my land that could lead to liability issues." Jack's voice was carefully neutral, but Eliza could hear the underlying concern. "My father," she whispered, cold realization washing over her. "He's found another way to apply pressure." "Looks that way," Jack agreed. "Tom's a good neighbor, but he can't afford to risk a lawsuit. Can't blame him for backing out." Eliza set down her glass with more force than necessary. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. My father agreed to return the mortgage, but he's still finding ways to make trouble. And it's you who's paying the price for helping me." "Hey," Jack said gently, reaching over to take her hand. "This isn't your fault, and we'll figure it out." "How?" "My father has unlimited resources and connections. If he can't control me directly, he'll use indirect pressure. Anyone who helps me becomes a target." Eliza stood abruptly, pacing the small porch. "Maybe I should leave, go somewhere he can't trace me." "Running won't solve the problem," Jack pointed out. "Richard Prescott has a long reach, and besides—" He hesitated, then continued more softly. "I don't want you to go." The simple admission stopped Eliza in her tracks. She turned to face him, vulnerability and hope warring in her expression. "Jack." He rose, closing the distance between them. "I know it's complicated. I know we come from different worlds. And I know you're just beginning to figure out who you are without your father's influence." His hands gently came to rest on her shoulders. "But these past days with you, they've meant something to me. You've meant something to me." Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. Everything he said was true. It was complicated, perhaps impossibly so, yet standing there in the soft glow of the porch light, with the scent of summer roses and distant rain in the air, those complications seemed to fade in importance. "You've meant something to me too," she whispered, allowing herself to acknowledge what had been building between them since that first rainy afternoon. "More than I expected, more than I was prepared for." Jack's smile was gentle, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Life's funny that way. The most important things usually catch us by surprise." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. Eliza closed the final distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening with shared certainty. His arms encircled her waist as hers wound around his neck, the simple embrace feeling like coming home to a place she'd never been before. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Just so you know," he murmured, "this complicates everything." Eliza laughed softly. "I think we passed complicated when my father showed up in a helicopter." Their shared laughter broke the tension, and they settled back onto the porch steps, Jack's arm around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him as they watched the stars emerge in full brilliance above the darkened fields. "What happens now?" Eliza asked after a comfortable silence. "Tomorrow we go to the farmer's market," Jack replied pragmatically. "We sell tomatoes. We face the Martha Henshaw Inquisition together." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And after that, we figure it out one day at a time." The simplicity of the plan was its own kind of revelation to Eliza. All her life, she'd lived according to carefully orchestrated schedules and expectations, the right schools, the right social events, the right career path, the right marriage. The freedom to take each day as it came, to make choices based on what felt right rather than what was expected. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "One day at a time," she repeated, liking how the words felt. "I can do that." But as they sat together in companionable silence, Eliza couldn't help but wonder how long this idyllic interlude could last. Her father's warning echoed in her memory. Sooner or later, she'll remember who she really is and what she's giving up. Would he be right? Would the novelty of farm life wear off, leaving her longing for the comforts and conveniences she'd left behind? And what of Jack? This good, steady man who had opened his home and now his heart to her. Was it fair to draw him into her complicated world when she herself wasn't certain where she belonged? As if sensing her thoughts, Jack squeezed her shoulder gently. "Stop overthinking," he murmured. "Tomorrow's problems can wait for tomorrow." Eliza smiled, nestling closer to him. For tonight at least, she would follow his advice. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing with it decisions to make and paths to choose. But here now, under a canopy of stars with Jack's solid presence beside her, she allowed herself to simply be. Not Eliza Prescott, heiress and runaway bride, but just Eliza, a woman discovering what it meant to follow her own heart. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Eliza stood at the edge of Jack's, their cornfield, watching the harvest in progress. Golden stalks fell in neat rows as the combine moved methodically across the land, gathering the summer's bounty. Jack was at the controls, a speck in the distance, his movements confident and practiced even from afar. So much had changed since that rainy afternoon when her Mercedes had slid into a ditch, derailing her carefully planned life and sending her onto an unexpected path. The trust fund was now fully in her control, the money sitting mostly untouched in an account, while she figured out what mattered most to her. The media frenzy around the billionaire's runaway bride had eventually subsided, replaced by newer scandals among the elite. Eliza's phone buzzed in her pocket, her new number known only to a select few. It was a text from Emily, Jack's daughter. "Flight lands at 3. Can't wait to finally meet you in person. Dad says you're making his famous apple pie." "No pressure or anything." Eliza smiled, typing back a quick reply. Emily's visit had been postponed twice due to midterm exams and a research opportunity. But today, she was finally arriving for a long weekend. The prospect of meeting Jack's daughter in person after weeks of video calls and text messages brought a flutter of nervous anticipation. Would Emily approve of the woman who had so unexpectedly become part of her father's life? Who was, perhaps, becoming part of her family? The sound of tires on gravel drew Eliza's attention to the driveway, where Martha Henshaw's pickup was pulling in. The town gossip had become one of Eliza's most steadfast allies, introducing her around Riverdale, defending her against curious questions, and providing unexpected wisdom about adapting to rural life. "Morning, honey," Martha called, emerging from her truck with a large basket. "Brought those canning jars you asked for. Thought we might get started on those tomatoes before they go bad." "You're a lifesaver," Eliza replied, walking over to help with the basket. "I've never canned anything before. Without you, I'd probably give the whole town botulism." Martha chuckled. "Well, we can't have that. Bad for tourism." Inside the farmhouse kitchen, they worked side by side, preparing tomatoes for canning. The radio played softly in the background, occasionally interrupted by the crackle of the police scanner that Martha insisted on bringing along. "Best way to stay informed, honey." "So," Martha said casually, slicing a tomato with practiced efficiency, "Sheriff mentioned there were some city folks asking about property values around here again. Suits, driving a black car with Chicago plates." Eliza's hand stilled momentarily. "When was this?" "Yesterday afternoon, over at Wilson's Diner." Martha continued her work, seemingly unconcerned. "Sheriff Davis sent them on their way. Told them this county wasn't for sale." The interference hadn't stopped entirely. Every few weeks there would be some new tactic. Potential buyers suddenly withdrawing offers on nearby properties. Unexpected tax audits for businesses that dealt with Jack's farm. Strangers asking questions around town. Richard Prescott was nothing if not persistent. "You don't seem worried," Eliza observed, studying Martha's untroubled expression. "Oh, honey." Martha set down her knife, fixing Eliza with a knowing look. "Your daddy might be a big fish in the Chicago pond, but he's learning that small towns have their own kind of power. Folks around here look after their own, and like it or not, you're one of us now." The simple statement brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes. One of us. In all her years in Chicago's elite circles, she'd never truly felt she belonged, always performing, always careful to meet expectations. Here, in this small farming community that by all logic should have rejected her as an outsider, she'd found genuine acceptance. Besides, Martha continued with a mischievous smile, that trust fund of yours didn't hurt when the elementary school needed a new roof last month. Amazing how quickly loyalty forms when you help the local children. Eliza laughed, wiping away a stray tear. Her first major expenditure from the trust had been a donation to the Riverdale Elementary School, which had been struggling with budget cuts. It wasn't charity in the way she'd been raised to understand it, formal galas and oversized checks presented for photo opportunities, but a quiet investment in the community she was growing to love. The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Martha sharing town gossip and canning wisdom in equal measure. By the time Jack returned from the fields, the kitchen counters were lined with jars of preserved tomatoes, their red contents gleaming like jewels in the late afternoon light. "Looks like you two have been busy," he observed, washing his hands at the sink. His eyes met Eliza's over Martha's head, warm with affection that still made her heart skip. "Martha's taught me all her secrets," Eliza replied. "I'm practically a farm wife now." The words slipped out before she could consider their implication. A flush spread across her cheeks as Martha raised an eyebrow, looking between them with undisguised interest. "Well now," the older woman said, gathering her things with suspicious haste. "Would you look at the time? I should be getting back. Tom will be wondering where I've gotten to." She paused at the door, eyes twinkling. "You two enjoy your evening. And Jack, don't forget what I told you about timing." After Martha had gone, an awkward silence settled over the kitchen. Jack busied himself getting a glass of water, while Eliza fussed unnecessarily with the canned tomatoes. "So," Jack said finally, "you're a farm wife now?" Eliza's blush deepened. Figure of speech. Martha's influence, clearly. Jack set down his glass and crossed to where she stood, gently turning her to face him. What if it wasn't just a figure of speech? Eliza's breath caught. "Jack, I know it's only been 3 months," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "I know there's still a lot we're figuring out. And I know your father hasn't given up trying to pressure you to come back to Chicago." "None of that matters," Eliza insisted. "I'm not going back." Jack studied her face as if searching for any hint of doubt. "Are you sure? Your father wasn't entirely wrong, you know. This life, it's not easy. The work is hard, the rewards often small, the luxuries you grew up with. We're just things," Eliza finished for him. "Empty, meaningless things." She placed her hand against his cheek, feeling the roughness of end-of-day stubble beneath her palm. "What I found here, what I found with you, that's what matters, that's what's real." Jack's smile was slow and sweet, transforming his weather-lined face. From his pocket, he withdrew a small worn velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. Martha's been giving me grief about it daily." Eliza's heart thundered in her chest as he opened the box to reveal a ring, not a flashy diamond like the one Robert Sinclair had given her, but a delicate band of gold with a small pearl nestled in its center. "It was Sarah's," Jack explained softly. "Her grandmother's before that. Not nearly as fancy as what you're used to." "It's perfect," Eliza whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Jack took her hand, his own slightly trembling. "Eliza, these past months have been the happiest I've known since I lost Sarah. You've brought light and laughter back into this old house, back into my life. I know it hasn't been long, and I know there are 1,000 reasons why this might seem crazy, but..." He took a deep breath. "Would you consider becoming a real farm wife? My wife?" Time seemed to suspend as Eliza looked into the eyes of this good, steady man who had changed her life with a simple act of kindness on a rainy afternoon. All the doubts and fears that had plagued her, about belonging, about adapting, about her father's continued interference, faded into insignificance against the certainty she felt in this moment. "Yes," she said simply. Yes, I would consider it. Very favorably, in fact. Jack's laugh was joyous as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her, the pearl catching the late afternoon light that streamed through the kitchen window. Later that evening, as they waited at the airport for Emily's arrival, Eliza's phone buzzed with a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Eliza Prescott? The voice was professional, unfamiliar. Yes? This is Charles Whitman, your father's attorney. I'm calling to inform you that Prescott Energy has entered into a consent decree with the Environmental Protection Agency regarding irregularities in our environmental impact reporting. Your father asked me to tell you personally that all unofficial inquiries in your area will cease, effective immediately. Eliza caught her breath, understanding the message behind the formal language. Meredith must have applied pressure of her own. Richard Prescott was finally backing down. Thank you for letting me know, Mr. Whitman, she replied evenly. Please tell my father I appreciate the courtesy. As she hung up, Jack looked at her questioningly. She explained the call, a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged lifting from her shoulders. So that's it? Jack asked. He's giving up? For now, Eliza replied. My father never truly gives up, but I think he's finally accepting that I've made my choice. She looked down at the pearl ring gleaming on her finger, then back up at Jack. And it's the right one. The airport terminal's automatic doors slid open, and a young woman with Jack's eyes and smile burst through, dropping her backpack to throw her arms around her father. As Jack made the introductions, Emily embraced Eliza without hesitation. So you're the runaway bride who landed in Dad's cornfield, Emily said, her eyes twinkling with the same warmth as her father's. Best crop he's ever harvested, if you ask me. As they walked together toward the parking lot, Emily chattering about her marine biology program and Jack's arms secure around Eliza's waist, the future stretched before them, not the prescribed path of privilege and power that Richard Prescott had mapped out for his daughter, but a road of Eliza's own choosing, with its own challenges and joys. And for the former society princess who had found her true self in the most unlikely of places, that made all the difference in the world.